Hi, Darren here. This is the story of Dot Dash. Graham Lewis, the band's bass player, sometimes singer, main lyricist, shared this story about 10 years ago now in an article in the online kind of music culture arts magazine, The Quietus. But there were a few things in his account that, to me, didn't quite add up. I donned my virtual deerstalker, did a little bit of amateur sleuthing, and this is the result. This is the complete, as we'll ever get it, story of the origins of Dot Dash. So first, a little scene setting. Yeah, Dot Dash was the band's third single, released in June of 1978. Their second single, I'm the Fly, had been released earlier that year, February in fact, and would feature on the band's second album, Chairs Missing. But Dot Dash never made it to that album. It was a standalone single, and one of the fruits of the band's incredibly fertile creative period between Pink Flag, their debut album released at the very end of 1977, and Chairs Missing. And the band would take huge creative leaps during this period. I think the kind of the speed and the scale of their evolution means that you can quite legitimately call Wire the first post-punk band of that period. Anyway, the beginning of the Dot Dash story. Let's break down Graham's recollections from that very short piece in the Quietus. So Graham says the band were crossing the Fens, that is travelling from the Midlands to a gig in Norwich, my hometown, and that the journey they'd made to get to Norwich was a pretty scary one. The Fens is a very flat, very low-lying area, a mixture of kind of marshland and farmland, and the roads in that area are often elevated above the surrounding fields. You'll find steep banks either side of the road, deep kind of drainage channels, ditches. These roads are very often very windy. When the fog descends, as I believe it did on that journey, yes, it can be a very scary drive indeed. I've done it myself, and it's very stressful. So yes, Graham then goes on to say that they got to Norwich and they were scheduled to play a venue called Ricky's. Okay, here's the first problem I had with the story. Was there actually a venue called Ricky's? So I did try reaching out to a few people who may have had a bit more knowledge of live venues in Norwich in the late 1970s, and the result was nobody had heard of it. Nobody could recall a place called Ricky's. The trail kind of went dead. I was stumped, so back to Google and ploughing through Wire gigographies, gig histories. You can only really get the full picture by looking across a bunch of them and comparing them. And most of them did indeed, corroborate Graham's story that this date, the 7th of March, 1978, was at a venue called Ricky's. So I was immediately back to square one. But digging a little further, I found one of these gig histories. It was the one at songkick.com, in fact. It had 2 entries for a gig in Norwich on the 7th of March, 2 for the same night. And one said Ricky's, and the other said People's Nightclub. So People's was not a name I'd encountered before, but when I searched again, I turned up an entry on the amazingly useful Music from the East Zone, which is an archive of music-related information covering the East Anglia region. I'll flash up the entry on that website for you to have a look at while I'm talking. Links to all of these resources will be in the description below. So yes, People's was open for only 3 years, from 1976 to 1979. And for the last year of its existence, it was renamed the Boogie House. Now, this is the point where you can really pick up the trail on the internet. The Boogie House is listed as a place that hosted gigs by The Specials, The Cure, The Undertones, Iron Maiden even. They all played this venue during its short existence. So this venue, People's, the Boogie House, it seems to be the right one. Where did Ricky's come from? Again, that entry in the East Anglia Music Archive, it finally gives us the answer. People's, or the Boogie House, was a basement club. And above it, owned by Peter Bailey, who was also the guy who bought People's and renamed it the Boogie House, was a cafe. And that cafe was called Rixie's Cafe Americano. Ricky's was in actual fact Rixie's, which was just the street level property above the venue itself. I'll flash up a flyer here for a gig by a few local punk bands, Rumble Strips and The Toes. This is from November 1977, and it clearly identifies the club as People's, and it says, it's next door round the back of Rixie's. And if you're interested in some kind of non-Wire related punk tales, there's evidence also that a band containing some famous UEA, that's the University of East Anglia, some famous UEA alumni, Charlie Higson and Paul Whitehouse, they played a gig at People's in their own punk band called The Right Hand Lovers. Yeah, these two are kind of British comedy royalty almost, stars of, the Harry Enfield Show, the Fast Show, amongst others. So as I said, the venue is long, long gone. It only lasted from 1976 to 1979. But the building is essentially still there. In fact, here it is. Yes, this is Evans Cycles on Westlegate in Norwich city centre, sitting in the shadow of the recently renovated and remodelled Westlegate Tower. Here, if you're interested, is a view over Norwich from the penthouse of the tower. But its time as a venue itself, I can find no actual archival pictures of it at all in its time as Rixey's, People's, the Boogie House. But here's a photo of it in its pre-Rixey's incarnation as Purdy's. And here again, after a period of being boarded up for a while in the early 1980s, as a McDonald's, which is how it remained well into the noughties. I did go in and ask the staff in Evans Cycles if the basement was still there. And yes, it is, but it's basically just used for storage. And they really weren't that keen on letting me rummage around down there to look for, old punk rock memorabilia. Anyway, I think we can definitively say that this was the venue that Wire was scheduled to play on the 7th of March, 1978. But before we go on with the rest of the story, just a little issue I have with the timeline. So Graham Lewis says that they drove in over the fens from the Midlands to Norwich for the gig. But just about all the gig history pages have the immediately preceding date as being at the University of Essex in Colchester on the 4th of March. And that isn't the Midlands. And any journey that you would take along that route wouldn't cross the fens at all. Plus, there's that 3-day gap there. Looking a little deeper, I think the most likely explanation, unless there's a missing gig between the 4th and the 7th, is that this has been kind of slightly misremembered, if you like, by Graham based on an earlier gig. Yeah, in one of the gig history websites I found, about 2 or 3 weeks earlier than that date, there was a gig that Wire played in Birmingham at a venue called Rebecca's. That was on the 16th of February 1978. And the following day, they played at the West Runton Pavilion near Cromer on the 17th. So a journey to Cromer from Birmingham would bring them in across the fens and through or very, very close to Norwich, on the way to the coast. I can't 100% confirm this, but this date, about 3 weeks earlier, seems to better fit Graham's recollection of driving across the fens and passing through Norwich. So brief sidebar here, the West Runton Pavilion, a bit of a legend in the East of England for some of the early punk gigs it hosted. From about 1976 onwards, the following people played there: the Sex Pistols, the Damned, the Buzzcocks, Gang of Four, the Stranglers, the Banshees, many, many more. The pavilion was one of a handful of kind of smaller regional UK venues that was happy to accommodate, the new punk bands of the day, despite all the, the initial press hysteria, all the furore surrounding them. Back to our story. Yes, Wire, the 7th of March, 1978, Norwich, now playing in People's Nightclub. The band arrive and they can't get into the venue. Or more specifically, the band's PA can't get into the venue. It literally won't fit through the doors. So the gig is cancelled at the 11th hour. Literally, they would have had to have taken down some walls, knocked out some brickwork to get the band's speakers and the PA system into the venue. They packed up, they jumped back into their manager, Mike's BMW, and they drove back to London the same evening. So driving to London from Norwich, this route heads roughly southwest and it goes along a road called the A11. The A11 is the major road between London and Norwich, and it follows the route of some quite ancient Roman roads. So the section between London and Bishop Stortford, that's where Stansted Airport, London's third airport, is, that was converted to dual carriageway, 2 lanes in each direction, in 1975. And over the years, the entire road has been dualled with various towns and villages being bypassed along the way. In 1978, however, most of that road was still single carriageway, 1 lane in each direction. So I guess the 115 or thereabouts mile trip would probably take you anywhere between 2 up to 3 hours, depending on traffic. And it was on one of these single carriageway sections of the A11 that Graham's story continues. And that's where we're going to jump to now. Okay, so this is the old A11. The last part to be bypassed to make way for dual carriageway. So this is the kind of stretch of single carriageway road that you would have been driving down in 1978 if you were driving from Norwich to London, as Wire were almost exactly 45 years ago. This is the section of the road that bypassed, or has now been bypassed, and we're kind of right on the edge of Elvedon Village. This was kind of a bit of a black spot. You'd often get tailbacks, you'd often get farm machinery, farm vehicles, trucks holding everyone up, and the temptation to try and just nip around someone at the last minute would have been very big. So yeah, driving down this road of a March evening, 7, 8 o'clock, before the clocks had changed, it would have been dark. I can quite imagine how someone would have been trying to overtake a slower vehicle maybe and been over the wrong side of the road. And that seems to be what happened with Wire. And they had a very near miss with a vehicle on the wrong side of the road that changed lanes at the last second. And yeah, so it would have been that near miss which took off a good portion of the chrome on the side of their manager's car that led to Graham Lewis writing the lyrics for Dot Dash. Mist closing in, getting thicker. One drops out, becoming quicker. Lights grow dim, they glimmer. The chance is smaller, the odds are slimmer. And then the chorus, dot dash, dip flash, don't crash, don't crash. Yeah, it's quite a jaunty and upbeat, almost jolly song. Yeah, that 2-note back and forth riff that it bears, it brings to mind Morse code, SOS, dash, dot. It's a cry for help. And the imagery, yes, the dots and dashes, the road markings, the dipping and flashing of headlights to signal where you are in thick fog. And I think you'd also say that riff, that 2-note riff, also has something of the police or ambulance siren about it. But what in Wire terms, it is quite a simple pop song, I guess. Maybe hewing slightly closer to the Pink Flag sound than the Cheers Missing sound. It's definitely got an edge to it. There's a little bit of rising panic in it. And I think when you hear the story behind the song, you can fully understand why. Anyway, that is the story of Dot Dash. Yeah, a little bit of a mystery, a little bit of detective work. I hope you've enjoyed this. Yeah, I can't really 100% vouch for every detail I've added here. So apologies to Graham if I've over embellished and brushed over some of your own personal recollections. But at least I think we've got to the bottom and found a bit more detail about the venues and the details surrounding the writing of this song. So please, yeah, if you've enjoyed this video, give it a like. It really does help. Yeah, any comments you want to add as well below, please go ahead. And if you've enjoyed this, go and check out my 2 Wire primer videos covering their pre-millennial and post-millennial incarnations. Yeah, anyway, that's all from me for now. Take care and bye for now.